So hello everyone. My name is Dexter Wimberly. I'm a senior critic at New York Academy of Art. I'm so happy that we have the opportunity to come together today to talk about creative resilience with Kenturah Davis. I'm just going to start off by introducing Kenturah and get right into our conversation. Kenturah Davis is a Los Angeles-based artist who works between Altadena, California, New Haven, and Accra, Ghana. She creates distinctive portraiture using text as her primary medium, exploring how language fundamentally shapes identity and representation. Davis earned her BA from Occidental College and her MFA from Yale University School of Art. Her work has been featured in recent solo exhibitions, including Clouds at Stephen Friedman Gallery, London, Apropos of Air at Matthew Brown in Los Angeles, Afloat, A Fall, A Dance, A Death at Jeffrey Deitch, New York, and Everything That Cannot Be Known at the SCAD Museum of Art in Savannah. Kentura, welcome to today's conversation.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, so you're coming to us from Los Angeles now, or your studio in California, yes?
Yeah, technically Altadena, California.
Oh, Altadena, great, great. So I obviously just gave a brief, intro bio, but I always love to give people an opportunity to introduce themselves in the way that they would normally would, because certainly bios are, little bit formal. But how do you describe the work that you do and yourself as an artist?
Well, the briefest description is the bio of my IG, which says I'm an artist and a writer of sorts. And so that's kind of the easiest way because my work is so tied to thinking about language, especially how it can appear or be materialized in certain ways. And so that has kind of guided, the all the things I make and even how I walk through my life from day to day.
Thank you for that. I was curious to, just for those who are just coming to know your work, you've described language as as fundamental in shaping identity in your work. How did you first begin using text as a just sort of primary material for creating portraits? What drew you to that? What was that process like?
So I grew up wanting to be an artist. I come from a creative family, and I mean, in my formative years, I would have called myself a painter, even through, doing an undergraduate degree. But I found myself frustrated with painting,
Mm,
particularly my painting, just because it wasn't, I don't know, I just felt like I couldn't tap into something that um, meant a lot to me. And I also, I minored in anthropology. And so there was something about like culture and how cultures made and change over time. And so language has so much to do with that. And so there was a point where I quit painting, but I kept a notebook. And so I would, write a lot. And eventually, when I started sketching again, some text I wrote overlapped with a drawing I made. And I embarked on this journey really just thinking about writing as a way of drawing. Um,
right.
they have some equivalents. And so that was like an interesting territory for me to explore because as an artist interested in portraiture, I was thinking about who we are and how we understand the world is so wrapped up with language that we've absorbed over time that if I could make an image entirely by writing, that could say much more about the figure, or at least about how we can perceive a figure. So that's when I started writing portraits.
Excellent, excellent. So in your bio, it mentions that you're sort of working from Altadena, Accra, New Haven. Um, can you talk a little bit about your relationship to those three places, those three cities?
Yeah. Well, there was. Uh, I'll say it's not as valid the past couple years, but uh, there was a point where I was literally going back and forth between Connecticut and Los Angeles. I was fortunate to be part of the inaugural cohort at Titus Kafar's Next Haven residency. And at the same time, I got offered a teaching job, excuse me, at Occidental College here in LA. So I was back and forth all the time. Um, Prior to that, I had spent a couple years in Ghana, Accra, and it's still a place I go back to. It's like a second home. And excuse me. Um, yeah, so it's still a place I'm really connected to. A couple years ago, some friends and I went in and together bought some land. So it's a place that I want to, at some point have a sort of place where myself and other artists can go to spend time in, West Africa. And yeah, it's a place that I remain tied to, less physically at the moment, but definitely kind of spiritually and culturally.
I think the last time I saw you in person was at Next Haven in New Haven, and that would have been, wow, that would have been 2018, 19.
Yeah, probably 2019.
Yeah, yeah, time flies. Um, so for those who don't know, the Next Haven artist residency, as you mentioned, was founded by Titus Kafour. And can you talk a little bit about that experience? I think a lot of people are familiar with Titus's work as an artist, but maybe not so familiar with Next Haven. Obviously, quite a bit of time has passed since you were there, but can you just kind of talk a little bit about your experience being there and what you're able to share about what Next Haven is?
Yeah. Next Haven was really wonderful. And I think it was partly about the timing. I had just finished my MFA at Yale, and in the course of those 2 years, had met him and knew that he was developing this residency, and so it was just such a flow to go from a program that was really meaningful to me to this other kind of program that offered to help fill in the gaps of what a lot of grad schools don't sort of present or manage or offer to the students. And so it's a really fantastic kind of mentor program where you're there with 6 or 7 other artists, and having someone like Titus there to sort of guide you, give you advice as you're finding your way in the art world, trying to, if you want to go the sort of gallery representation route, he was really instrumental in giving me advice. And so I think it helps create a more rounded idea of what it is to be an artist, and added this kind of like professionalized layer to it, um, from things about like accounting, um, to how do you maintain your own archive, things like that, that were super important. And yeah, it's a really great program, and I highly recommend it.
And you mentioned something that I wanted to touch on a bit, and that was sort of like, career related, advice or information, things that artists often find themselves challenged by once they're out into the world, right? Once you leave the academic setting and you're sort of like, you're basically in the business of being an artist, whatever that means for each individual. But you've had a lot of success in your career over the past several years, and I was just curious to know, like, what's like one or two of the biggest challenges you faced in being an artist? I mean, obviously, it's a case by case situation for every person, but for example, just give you an example of what I mean. I mean, was it difficult for you to find a place for your studio? Was it challenging for you to get representation? Sort of, what has some of that journey been like for you?
I think by navigating the kind of professional aspect of it really demands that you be nimble. And because I was an older student coming into grad school, I think I was like 35 when I went. So I was definitely one of the older students. So I feel like something about that like having lived in the world, worked in the art world, that I was coming into these other experiences with some of that background already. But I think where I've found myself is, really grappling with how to be nimble in whatever context I find myself in. And so I guess that means like um, when I quit my sort of like art world gallery job, I moved to Accra, and um, Accra and West Africa increasingly has this like wonderful art scene, but there's like not
Hmm.
a lot of money, and so you really have to just like find your way. And I it was interesting because I know that there are many ways to be an artist, and there's, you know, a sort of like convention that I think is easy for students or, artists in general to have about um, what being an artist looks like. But I think if you blur the definition and how you think you can navigate the world, you will navigate it much more easily.
What do you mean by that? Blur the definition.
I guess so like when I was in Accra, I did my first public art project. And so that and it's a kind of interesting thing where if you get one public art project, it makes you more likely to get others because you have built a kind of track record. And so I think I maybe didn't even necessarily consider that that was also an avenue to pursue. So even when I moved back to LA, I threw my name in the hat for LA has been expanding their metro line. So I threw my name in the hat for that. And I got that. And that turned out to be like one of the biggest projects that I had done at that time. And and so then I met other artists who sort of um, like they kind of lean into doing art for public space and
Hmm.
carved out a way for them to work that I never would have never occurred to me. And so I think there's just like there's many ways like and you don't have to be kind of like stuck in one. I go back and forth between doing public projects and doing more conventional gallery shows and things like that. But my dad uh, he was a set painter in TV and film. And I mean, that industry's changed over the past several decades.
Yeah.
But, for a while, I considered that that might be an option for me too. Um, so I guess all to say is that besides being creative about the actual work you're making, there is a lot of creativity that can be applied to like the context your work can be made for.
Yeah, I thank you. I like what you said about there's like different ways of being an artist. It's something that I often come back to when I'm having conversations with artists or even other people in the art world. I just think that it's a good reminder that, everyone's career path is going to be different. And trying to compare yourself to other people, when on paper you might say, oh, we went to a similar school and we make similar work. Why don't we have a similar career? Like kind of thing is just sort of not the way to think about it because, all of these twists and turns and just matters of life are going to affect one's career trajectory. I want to come back to that in a bit, but for now, since I know we have a limited amount of time and we have some images of your work, I want to share some images and we can talk a little bit about your work. And this is especially helpful for those who may not be as familiar with your work as I am. And then we'll touch on some other topics. So hopefully, hopefully Zoom will make this sharing process easy. And hopefully, let's see. Are you seeing my entire screen
Yes,
with no thumbnails?
with no thumbnails.
Awesome. I have learned with Zoom over the years that there's no reason to pretend. You just need to make sure that it's working the way you want it,
Oh,
want it to work. Okay, so let's jump into it here. So, maybe you could share a little bit about each work. And we're not going to spend too much time on each one since we have quite a few, but I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit about the background of the work and whatever you're able to impart.
Yeah, so this was one of uh, uh, the first works I made after, let's see, after grad school. Um, and it was important for me because, like, as a person who makes portraits, I went to grad school and very quickly pivoted to make everything but portraiture. Like I was in the painting and printmaking department making sculpture. And so when I came out, I really wanted to think about if I was going to go back to doing something that's like more conventionally in the category of portraiture, how can what I did before, how I spent those 2 years in school, how can they inform the drawings? And so I really pushed the kind of like photographs I made, which are the sort of reference points for the drawings. And so I got into doing these sort of like doubling and blurring images. So this is an example of one of the ones with this sort of doubling, and they're made by writing. I use, in this case, rubber stamp um, lettering, and so it does spell out a text from left to right and repeats each row.
Fantastic. And so maybe more of the same by way of explanation.
Similar, this I inverted the sort of text to the ground of the paper. So I use an etching press and emboss text into the paper. It's this kind of blind emboss. And then I render the figure by drawing on top of that. So from a distance, you can't see the text, but as you get closer, the blurry image starts to fall apart, but the text becomes more apparent.
And so for those who don't quite understand what you're explaining is that these images that we're seeing are actually the result of text writing on a very sort of small scale that then sort of forms the image.
Yeah, well, for the first one, the image is made by writing, so that's stamping the lettering to build up the information. In the case of this one and the one just before it, the text is impressed into the paper, and then it's just my writing that goes on, that draws on top of that embossed text.
How do you go about choosing the subjects for your work? Who are these individuals? What's the relationship? I
Well, this
guess
one,
that's
yeah, and this one, she is me, um, when I had locks. But more recently, I've been thinking about language as a kind of choreography. And so I've been working with dancers who initially they were like dancers I met through a choreographer friends, and then they become friends. But the kind of through line is that they're all Black women. Um, and so I just sort of have leaned into that. I like this idea of sort of like limiting the parameters to then explore a ton of other things.
hmm. And so this is a bit different from the work we've seen before. There seems to be sort of a something quite painterly going on this surface. Can you
Yeah,
talk about that process?
sure. So when I started leaning into doing these blurred images, they're derived from making long exposure photographs of my sitter. And so I wanted to make a ground for the drawing that would also bring in an element about like time, since the blur already is suggesting sort of the passing of time. So these are these kind of like colorful photograms where I basically pour ink across the paper and then I expose it in the sun for days, and so the sunlight will shift the tone of the color. Sometimes I place objects on it so it leaves like a kind of shadow of what the object was behind. But it was just, I started treating the paper ahead of doing the drawing on top of it to sort of compound the sense of time passing in the image. And so that I think this sort of like watery quality um, kind of pairs well with the sort of moving blur of the image.
Hmm. I lost you for a moment there. That's highly unusual, but can you hear me now? Is everything good?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start the slideshow again. I think there was maybe like 45 seconds or so that we were down, but we'll just keep it moving. Hang on one second.
Okay.
I think this is where we were.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, did you hear me say anything about it?
Sure. I you talked a bit about the process, so I think we can move on to the next work. And I'm curious about what's going on the side of this work. Like, what were your sort of the decision making around this format as well?
Yeah, so I tend to sort of hone in on a process and then build on it. So the figurative part is similar to the last made similarly to the last image we just looked at with the sort of layered writing by stamping and then this sort of toned background. And then on the left side is a weaving. And I had I've always also been interested in textiles, and there was a point actually in grad school where one of the faculty suggested that I think about the relationship between the word text and textile, given that I'm interested in language and
That's
etymology
interesting.
like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So she said that, and I remembered I had this book that describes a Japanese process of making paper into thread. Um, and so uh, I started experimenting with the process. Then I found a second book about this process that tells a story about how during the feudal period in Japan, spies needed to get across enemy territories with a secret message. And so they wrote on paper, processed it in a thread, wove it into a cloth. And then when it got to its recipient, they undid everything to reveal this message. And so I um, started working with this process of writing on paper, making it into thread, and weaving with it. And then to push that along, given my connection to Ghana and my interest in like West African weaving traditions, I started working with a weaver there to integrate or basically use the paper thread that I make and weave it into a cloth. So the left panel is a cloth that's been stretched, but it's embedded with these texts. And so they're not like the figure, they're not legible, but in a way, these works become a kind of embodiment of these ideas that the piece has absorbed through language.
Fantastic.
And I started making these cloud drawings, gosh, a little over a year ago. Um, I've been reading kind of like introductory texts about quantum physics. And it started off with thinking about time because I was already thinking about time in the work and in the drawings and in the photography. And there's one book I read called The Order of Time. And the scientist was remarking about how, at the smallest scale, all matter kind of functions or is reminiscent of the way like foam or a cloud functions. And I thought it was interesting because, we can look up in the sky and see clouds and sometimes identify some sort of recognizable shape in them, but
Right.
they have this kind of duration, like they're there for a moment, then they're gone the next moment. And if we're thinking about sort of like cosmic time, we as people, we're here just for such a, blip of time. And So I got interested in making these cloud drawings that again had text embedded in the paper, but then I render with this indigo powder to render the clouds. So again, you get this experience of like seeing the cloud from a distance, and the closer you get to the work, the text starts to emerge and become legible where the drawing is darkest.
I love that. I love that.
And
And for this work, I'm also curious about the objects beneath the figures.
yeah, I got access to a lathe, um, and which is for wood turning. Um, and I started carving these vessels. And it came at a time when I was already thinking about vessels. Like we talk about our own bodies as a kind of vessel. We apply it metaphorically or as an analogy in many different ways. And so a lot of the drawings that I was doing at the time, even ahead of starting to make these vessels, I called planar vessels, meaning like a flat plane. And um, I have this thing about people talking about works on paper as just simply a 2D thing when
Mm.
paper is still an object, it still occupies space. And so I like this idea of thinking about a plane, something that's planar can be a vessel too. And so, especially when I had started embossing the paper, just the most shallow indentations in the paper invites meaning. So by pressing text into the paper, that alone, introduces shadows so you can like perceive meaning in the paper. So then I wanted to see what would it be like to have these planar vessels that I'm making with more conventional vessels. So I started turning these are ebony, some from wood I brought back from Accra, and then other um, pieces of ebony that I've collected since then.
Yeah, this work is incredible. Where is this now? Did it land with a collector or
Yeah, it
is it?
is a collector. Yeah,
That's
I think
great.
in
That's great.
Europe.
That's fantastic. And so we're going to move quickly through the next couple of images because we're getting to the second half and final half of our conversation. But I'm really enjoying getting a better understanding of, the background of these works because I knew quite a bit about the figures and the images of people, but I didn't know a lot about your description of like turning paper into thread and using a lathe and how that has sort of like found itself into your works. It's really great to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, this is a piece that I'm happy to say I own. I kept it for myself. It's sentimental, partly because the vessel in the middle came from a tree that I had at my house in Altadena, and so it's like one of the last things made prior to the fires we had earlier this year. But this piece sort of unites the drawing with the vessel with the weaving, and I think this is the first piece I did that. Where all three come together.
Oh, wonderful.
And this is a little hard to read. There will be a detail.
Yeah, I'm gonna skip to the detail now because it might be easier for folks to understand what you're seeing.
Yeah. So after the fires, I found I was just trying to find my way, like making work again. And so I found this vintage map of Altadena. And so I made a small edition where I embossed the map and then used a kind of raw pigment and dusted that across the embossed map. And so it kind of, it's darker at the top, gets lighter at the bottom, and it's evokes the kind of like heat and path of the fire across our little town here.
And so we have the final two images are images in the aftermath of the Altadena fire, and this kind of sets the stage for us to talk a little bit about the core of today's conversation, and that is sort of moving, having your life kind of evolve after a major event like this and sort of finding your way and your path. So maybe you can talk a little bit about this experience and what happened. I guess we can kind of start there. I don't even want to take for granted that everyone joining us today or even watch this in the future has a clear understanding of what happened in Altadena. So maybe from your own perspective, you can kind of give a little bit of background about what happened.
Sure. Yeah, on January 7th of this year, a fire actually started in the Palisades. And it was like the wind was crazy, 90, 100-mile-an-hour winds throughout the county. And then in the evening, a fire started here in Altadena in our, we have, there's a place area called Eaton Canyon. So fire started in Eaton Canyon and then spread very quickly across the city or across, yeah, our town. And nothing, I mean, LA has not experienced anything like this. That the first picture was my parents' house. The second picture is my house. I live 5 minutes from them.
Wow.
And I moved back to Altadena 3 years ago when I was, I believe, 7 months pregnant, because I wanted to give my kid the experience that I had growing up in Altadena. It's a really special place. Um, yeah, so we evacuated at like 1 in the morning, and
Wow.
not knowing what, not knowing the extent of what was going to happen over the next 24 hours. And so we returned the following week to find our homes like this.
Well, was your studio in your home or
I had really two workspaces. I had a weaving studio, and then the garage I was doing ceramics in, and then I had like extra storage with other work there. But the studio I'm in now here, that missed the fire by a block. So I'm very fortunate to still have this, which is where I work most of the time.
what was and again I know some of this is personal and you can feel free to answer or not answer anything that you are not comfortable answering. But like, what was it like for you to sort of like think about yourself as an artist in the context of this event happening? I mean, I think everyone deals with tragedy and traumatic incidents differently. But what was your sort of thought process? Like, how did you cope with it? What was what was going on in your mind insofar as you're willing to share as it relates to your career as an artist and your family? I mean, this is a pretty traumatic and incredible event.
Yeah, I mean, Altadena is a small place, but there's a lot of artists here, and it has a long history of artists who lived and worked here, including Charles White. Betty Sard used to live here. So many people, and just kind of become a haven for creatives. So a lot of us were going through the same thing. I have artist friends who are in worse situations where all of their art practice was also at their house. And so they, had an even kind of greater sort of tangible loss, maybe than I had. Uh, you know, I always there's this blur between my art and my life. Like it's almost the same. And so I think the first thing I was dealing with was, I have a 2-year-old, so just keeping him feeling safe and secure. So that was kind of like the primary thing on my mind the first, month or so even. But, quickly I was like, what do I do? Like I felt a pressure to account for what happened in the work, but I didn't know what that could look like. And when I finally got around to making the print, I did it as a fundraiser for a quilt group, a Black quilt group in the area that my mom belongs to. And so that actually, like, just deciding to make something helped trigger me getting back into the momentum of my work. And I mean, it was eye opening because, doing something as simple as a map has helped kind of expand my, the landscape, no pun intended, of my own practice to the point where now I'm embarking on designing these gardens that can be plugged into properties throughout Altadena. Um,
Gardens.
yeah. um,
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
yeah. So when, because both my parents and I lost our homes, um, someone had suggested that we pool our money together and build together. And so we decided my lot is a bit bigger than theirs. So we decided to like build together at my lot. And then when we can afford to rebuild theirs, we would do that. And I just hated the idea of their lot sitting empty. This process of recovery is going to take a long time for most people, but even if as neighbors around them, embark on rebuilding, I just didn't want it to be this like barren lot. So I suggested that I threw out the idea to them that I would plant a garden. And then very quickly, I was like, certainly there's tons of other people in the same situation. And I don't know, I've been interested in ideas around architecture and landscape. And even, you know, with my place that I had, I'd been working with a landscape architect uh, well before the fires. And so I had an interest in these things. So I'm basically partnering with some native plant experts and designing very small gardens that would sit at the threshold of the property, like right at the street, so that as people pass by, they have a place to sit down and enjoy a little bit of nature. And so that it's going to entail every site will have something, a place to sit, uh, native plants, and water. Um, I'm trying to figure out, design some like more aesthetic irrigation system. And so that's kind of the part I'm at now.
I admire the way that you've thought about this idea of rebuilding, that rebuilding doesn't have to literally mean rebuilding something exactly the way it was, that you can actually reimagine what a space can be, even in the aftermath of such a tragic event. You mentioned that there's a storied artist community in Altadena. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I mean, if there's any like anecdotes or sort of like stories that you can share about what it's like to be an artist in that city and sort of in that historical lineage.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's close because my dad is also an artist. Um, I had mentioned that he worked in TV and film for a long time, but he also is a painter. And so he got to know people like Charles White and, that generation of artists. And a lot of them were coming up to Altadena kind of before I was born and when I was really young. Um, but there's there's been a huge kind of community of creatives here. I don't know. I feel like it's like there's something in the water that attracts creatives to this area. But it's changed a lot over the decades. But certainly, just around the corner from my studio here, there's a park called Charles White Park. And very recently, the show this just closed, the California African American Museum um, put on a show called Ode to Dina that kind of covered a wide um, swath of the Black artists who, whether they had lived here or had come and visited or done projects up here. Dominique Moody is another artist who had spent time up here and developed her mobile art home that she's been working in for I think decades now. So yeah, it's a really special place. And then beyond that, extending past the art, um, I think part of the reason it became the town it is because Altadena, Black people were able to buy homes in Altadena, um, particularly on the western side. They sort of like, shed themselves of redlining kind of earlier than other areas in the county. And so Black families could come here and build homes. So my mom's family, who came from Arkansas, they started coming here back in the 50s. So yeah, there's a lot of that where it's just like there's opportunity here to, you know, buy a home and have that kind of life.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I've been thinking a lot about like what it actually means to be resilient, especially as a creative. And I think for the artists that are joining us today who are, dealing with their own, lives and challenges, as we all are, um, I'm just curious to know, like, what do you think got you through that? Was it, the closeness of your family? Was it the support of friends? Was it your artist community? Was it all of the above? Was it just some strength you have inside of you?
It's definitely all of the above. What I will say is LA, I was frankly happily surprised how swiftly the art community came together for each other. Between the Palisades and here in Altadena, there are just so many artists who were affected that that you know artists who weren't directly affected pulled together to come up with a ton of resources for us as artists. So that's one layer of it. But definitely having a lot of family here, it's like, we're in this together. Um, but I don't know. There's something about being an artist and the kind of, again, something about having to be nimble and to like recognize not just what the losses are, but like where are there opportun- opportunities in the situation. And so I think that's, the impulse to design a garden is like, what can we put here that maybe wasn't even here before that will contribute to the overall recovery of Altadena? Because it's not just going to be, it can't just be about rebuilding structures. We lost, entire ecosystems here that we're trying to help recover too. And so I wanted to do something that would kind of approach um, maybe the less obvious thing. Um, you know, you can't live in a garden, but you certainly can have a powerful experience in one.
Right, and I think things like gardens or other public spaces, these are things that I don't think they're luxuries. I think they are like incredible necessities for mental health and for just physical well-being. And I'm curious, as an artist, when something like a fire happens, it can be kind of doubly traumatic because on the one hand you have obviously it's life threatening, so that's the big priority, making sure that everyone is physically safe, right? I mean, because obviously life is more important than objects, no matter what the objects are. But I'm always like thinking like how crazy and devastating it would be to have one's entire, this wasn't the case for you, but to have one's entire studio with all of their work that's in it just destroyed. Because even if you have insurance, an insurance check doesn't redraw your work. It doesn't repaint the paintings. It doesn't resculpt sculpture. It's like you can't just like take a check and redo what could be a decade or more worth of work that's in your space. Do you know any artists that had that kind of thing happen to them?
Yeah. I mean,
I
where
mean,
all their work is gone.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, many. Um, Paul McCarthy is an artist that's lost his place here. Diana Thader. Um, yeah. Anyway, there's a number of them, and I think that's why the LA art community kind of really came together. Freeze supported us at the beginning of the year. Of Freeze LA happens in February. The fires happened in January, and they quickly got things together to help us. And yeah, I mean, I was just telling another artist who stopped by my studio today, who also lost his place. The layers of loss are still revealing themselves. Like there was work that I had forgotten I had, or it just didn't
Right.
like cross my mind.
Right.
I mentioned the work I did for the LA, the metro station. They were 10 large drawings I made. I got, and the way the public art project worked is they just reproduced the drawings at a larger scale. So I got to keep the drawings. And so I had been holding on to, I still had um, 6 of them. And so, those are really, they were really important to me, and they're gone. And even, small things like my diplomas, or work that I got from tons of work I got from other friends, like in school doing trades and things like that. And it's like you don't get that stuff back. I think I'm
Yeah.
really sad about the work of other artist friends that I lost.
Yeah, the phrase layers of loss, I mean, that really sticks out to me because I think that when I think about tragedies that have happened in my life, and not dissimilar to anyone else. I mean, I think the one thing you learn as you get older, is that that's one thing we all have in common. We will all lose things. Like that's just, it's just part of the journey of being alive. But the idea of layers of loss, that sticks out to me because sometimes it's not immediately after something happens that you even realize how much it's affected you. It can sometimes hit you like 6 months later when you're least, when you least expect it, when you're thinking about something completely different, and then it sort of like hits you like a wave, and you realize that, you really haven't kind of like dealt with or unpacked what it meant to go through that traumatic event. And I bring this up because I think that right now, as far as the world goes, I think a lot of us are going through our own version of trauma, our own version of upheaval, whether that's politically, economically, for other reasons. And I think it's just important for people to realize that they're not alone in going through things. I know that there are ways that people can kind of talk through these things with their friends, with their families. But I just think that for artists in particular, I think it's important to remember that whatever you're kind of coping with, you need to find a way to talk it through. You need to find a way to sort of like, if it doesn't get worked out through your art making process, then maybe there are other ways that you need to kind of like work these things out because to just carry it around. Is not necessarily the best way to go. But we're down to like the final 10 minutes of our talk. Just switching gears a little bit. What are you looking forward to? Like what's on the horizon that you're excited about in the coming months or year that you can talk about?
That I can talk about. Okay. I mean, part of it, I think I have to go back to trying to turn loss into opportunity. And,
Mm,
um, for my own, personal situation, it's like I can decide I can have greater authorship about what home looks like now more than ever. And as abruptly as my sense of like place and well-being and home was snatched away, I I always love a process that, is like happens over a duration. And so it's challenging, but the idea of like having a say in what my home and studio at the house will look like is really exciting. And by extension, even the gardens, and I think that's going to expand my own work. You were talking about fire, and I was trying to think of how to manage my ideas around fire as not just like a source of trauma. And so I signed up for throwing classes. So I'd been making ceramic works, but I never knew how to throw on a wheel. Um,
Hmm.
so I've been like doing that and loving it. And I'm the kind of artist where it's like, if I want to make a kind of object, I'm not going to get somebody else to make it. I want to learn how to do it myself. And so I feel like I'm in the process of like experimenting and playing, and really excited to see how that informs the work that reaches the public. Um, to speak about like an artist's life, I when I teach sometimes still, and when I teach, I think it's important to think through like not everything has to be presented to the public. Like some things you can be making that will just help, just expand your ideas. They may reach the public too, but I love this idea of just like experimenting, like I said, and staying open to how the work will grow.
Yeah, I like that idea too. I mean, I think that for many artists, there's this pressure to, have everything be perfect or, everything needs to be seen. And I always wonder about that because I'm like, I think there's something really wonderful about doing some things that are just for yourself. That it just has nothing to do with selling it, nothing to do with showing it to visitors or collectors, just kind of like building this collection of work that is truly just about you and like the things that you want to unpack and explore and it doesn't have to be subject to anyone else's judgment or commentary or like or even their input for that matter. I think that that's like a wonderful thing. It's a way to balance out what can often feel like this constant pursuit of validation from other people or this constant pursuit of like commercial success or whatever that means to an individual. Um, some might say that's sort of like a luxury because obviously materials cost money and space costs money and being able to use a kiln isn't necessarily free if you're renting it. But I think all those things aside, I think there's something really incredibly beneficial in that process. And so I'm really grateful that you were willing to share as much as you shared today. I think that there's a lot to learn and a lot of benefit from hearing firsthand about how someone has sort of gone through such a tumultuous event and found a way to grow out of it and to also be generous, right? And to not just think about, as you mentioned, not just think about rebuilding something as it was, but sort of reimagining what it could be. And so, I'm just really grateful. I want to thank you. We're down to the final few minutes, and I just wanted to know if there's anything else you wanted to share. I have maybe one more question or so that I'll ask you, but um, what, you know, if you had to sort of encapsulate it into a statement, like what did you learn through this process? Like, what's the big picture learning from what you went through or still going through since January?
Big picture. God, I wish I had something super profound. Life is hard.
Well, that's a big picture learning, right?
At every turn, I think, like I said, there's an opportunity to like think to problem solve, and I think that's the work of an artist is problem solving, or a good artist maybe. And So, given that our work and life is so blurry, everything can be seen as like a problem to solve. And, um, not every day it works. Like some days I do find myself really frustrated, but I think, generally I try to see the cup half full, and operate that way because life is short and very abruptly your life can change as I just experienced. But you do what you can and you try and find some pleasure and value in it along the way.
Well, I think that's a good note for us to end on, a good upbeat note. Thank you again, Kenturah, for everything you shared today. I encourage everyone who joined us today to, spend some more time looking at your work, finding opportunities to see it. In fact, before we go, where are one or two places your work is on view right now, anywhere in the world, just so that people would know that?
MoMA, if you're in New York, I have a very substantial drawing on view on the second floor in the permanent collection area. Um, in LA here, um, there's a new show that just opened called Giving You the Best That I Got at Art and Practice. That's a space started by Mark Bradford and his team here in Leimert Park. The show's curated by Dominique Clayton, and it's about artists and motherhood, which is like so tender, and it's a beautiful show. So if you're in LA, go see that.
Oh, someone in the comments just asked a question. New York Drawing Center. Do you have a work art drawing center? Is that true or
No,
no? No.
no.
Okay. Well, the Museum of Modern Art is well, easy to find. Well, thank you for everything that you've shared. We're going to come to a conclusion at this point, but I really appreciate you, Kentura, and I really enjoyed today's conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
See you soon.